Hi, I'm Austin with Pat Mooney Saws, and I'm going to show you how to do a blade change on a Nishijimax Cold Saw. Most important part, hit the E-stop. Wait for the power to turn off and the indicator light to turn on, so that way the door is open, you can open it safely. By your machine, make sure you guys have a 10mm Allen wrench and an 8mm Allen wrench and a 24mm wrench. The 10mm handle is to knock out the bolts on the saw housing. On our saw, it's a reverse threaded nut, so you're going to want to hit it to the right to loosen it. Make sure you got some clean rags around to wipe off any of the excess chips built up on the threaded bolts. Wipe off your blade flange to clean off any excess chip residue built up on it or any excess oil. At this point, with the saw blade removed, make sure you wipe down all of the contact points where the door shuts. Wipe off all the blade guides. Get rid of any excess chips or residue built up. And do not use air to blow out the chips. Cleaning out all chips and contact surfaces will allow the door to shut properly and keep the guide clearance as minimal as possible, which is supposed to be 1.5 to 2 thousandths on either side of the saw blade. Other important parts to look at while you're changing a saw blade is to clean out inside where the saw blade travels, where chips can get built up on the far side of the clamps in the travel path down at the base of the saw. And then chips can get built up on the plate on the infeed side. You might want to make sure you wipe those all out so that way there's good contact clamping area for when the bars are being infed in and clamped properly. Once you take the saw blade out of the packaging, make sure you wipe down all around the bore area where the flange is going to contact onto the saw blade, so it has a good contact onto the flange on the machine as well as the flange that you remove. Leave the plastic hosing on the teeth so you don't damage it when you're putting it onto the saw, and hit it against the clamp pads or any of the fixed surfaces so it doesn't chip out any of the teeth prematurely. And on our saw, the best way to know you're putting the blade on the right way is you see the Kanefusa logo staring at you in the face, and that should be on the top, staring back at you. Turn the blade nut to the left to tighten it. Before it's all the way tightened down, the most important part is to remove the backlash out of the saw blade so it's resting on the pins. Yeah. So you do not need to use a hammer at this point. Hand tightens plenty. At this point, you can remove the rubber hosing. Check your bolts again for any sort of buildup of residue on them to make sure there's no chips on it. You should be able to finger tighten these all the way down to the contact area of the saw housing. If you feel any resistance when you're tightening it down, make sure you take the screw back out, clean off the threads again, and if you need to at this point, you can have a little air blow into the threaded holes to clean out any chips that possibly could have gotten in there. Tighten them down a little bit more so it's secure. Again, just with your hands. No need to use a hammer. At this point, the last step we'll want to do is adjust our chip brush in to make sure it's covering half of your tooth and doing its job to clear out the chips while the saw is cutting. Important for continuous blade life and consistent blade life. At this point, you would close the door, turn off your e-stop, turn your master on, and go into your setup for your next application. Start by entering in the diameter of the material you're going to be cutting. Entering in your cut length. Selecting the material you're going to be cutting, which at this point is 1018. So then that will populate our cutting parameters, which is 140 RPM and a 0.08 chip load. You want to make sure you have the proper tooth count that we put onto the saw programmed into the machine. And then you want to set your part value at this point. So we have our diameter, our cut length, the material grade we're cutting, our trim cut length, our chip load for our feed rate for the material grade we're cutting, our RPM for the material grade we're cutting, which is 1018. We have a 285 millimeter diameter blade, 72 teeth. That's the tooth count on the saw blade that we have programmed, and our cut value that we just entered of 10 pieces for the job. Since the machine was off, you'll have to home it. Make sure the machine's in manual to home them saw. Once you get the cycle ready light up here, you can go into automatic mode, and now your cycle start button comes on. We'll double check again our cutting parameters for what we are running, our diameter, our cut length, the material we programmed in, our trim cut length, our tooth count, blade diameter, and the job that we have running, again, 10 pieces of the job.